All right, friends, it's time to give you loyal listeners a discount on protein powder. You may or may not know, but I launched my very first protein powder 2 years ago. It's a grass-fed beef isolate with only 3 ingredients: grass-fed beef, either organic cacao or organic vanilla, and organic monk fruit. Now, if you don't want any of the added flavor and sweeteners, you can also just get unflavored. And no matter what flavor you choose, you're getting over 23 grams of protein per scoop, which is going to keep you full and satisfied between meals. I love starting my day with a Fab4 smoothie and breaking my fast with that much protein. It makes a serious difference in my cravings and blood sugar balance the rest of the day, and I've seen it with my clients as well. Now, I never thought I'd own a product company, but when I got pregnant with Sebastian, I realized the majority of protein powders were chemically extracted or enzymatically extracted, and I wanted to use heat and water only. I wanted minimal ingredients because we don't need those emulsifiers, fillers, or added vitamins, minerals, and probiotics. All of those additions increase the chances that it's not going to work for your body, whether it be bloating, digestion issues. I just wanted pure, clean protein to keep you full and satisfied so you could build the most delicious Fab4 smoothie. And I have to say, I'm pretty proud of the flavor. If you take a look at our reviews on Amazon, you'll see 5-star reviews for flavor. And that is key, because if you don't love your Fab4 smoothie and you don't love drinking your protein powder, you're not going to do it. It won't become a habit, and it's consistency that outpaces everything. So if you're here and you're listening and you want to give our protein powder a try, use the code podcast5 for $5 off your order. And let me know if you love it. My favorite ways to apply this protein powder is in my Fab4 smoothie, making freezer fudge, making chocolate milk, making hot chocolate, and throwing the unflavored into all my kids' baked goods. So let me know how you use it. Let me know if you love it, and share this podcast deal with your friends. Today's guest is my friend, Danielle Walker. Danielle is someone I look up to personally and professionally. She is a phenomenally successful grain-free blogger and New York Times bestselling author with 4 cookbooks under her belt. Danielle is a wife and a mother to 4 beautiful babies, 3 who are here with us today, and Aila Jane, her sweet angel in heaven. In this episode, we discuss Danielle's road to recovery after being diagnosed with ulcerative colitis. And at the end of this episode, we celebrate the life of Aila. And it gets pretty emotional. But the advice Danielle offers on how we can support women of loss is beautiful and worth the listen. I hope you guys enjoy this sweet woman as much as I do. So let's get started. Take us back to the beginning. You were 22 years old. How did this all start?
Yeah, well, it feels like it came on overnight, but as we continue to process and learn more and just kind of look at some of the different signs, I started to notice that there was some sort of a pattern that could have kind of pinpointed it. And there's also autoimmune disease in my family, which I never knew growing up or when I was diagnosed. And I'm just kind of starting to learn a little bit more about that now. But yes, I was 22. My husband and I, the one I was singing about, going to Napa with, we are high school sweethearts. We got married after college. We dated kind of all through college and got married 2 months after we graduated. We moved back from Southern California, which he's a fellow Trojan.
Right on.
Yeah, up to Northern California so he could start law school and be back by our family. And, I just started noticing maybe a few weeks before our wedding that my digestion just kind of fell off. And it was one of those things that, well, first of all, I think even just you said from the doctors not getting answers. I also think just because anything bowel related is so embarrassing, especially for women, I think there's something about just kind of not saying anything about it for a while. You just kind of think oh, it's going to get better, or, I don't know. It's just almost like this stigma kind of thing attached to it of just I don't really want to tell people that I've got issues down there. It's so you just kind of live with it for a little bit. But I was young also, 22. And so I just didn't really realize that what I was experiencing could become so serious. But I, at the time, was having constipation for 6-7 days at a time, which I had never had before. And a little bit of rectal bleeding actually as well. We'll just get right down into it.
I was gonna stop you and ask you to give the details because there's people listening who are like, well, would I have diarrhea? Would I have
right?
Would it hurt to pass bowel movement? Would
all of the above?
Would I have
I'm like, we'll get more into it if you want. When I usually talk about my disease, like when I'm out speaking in public and everything, I kind of just mention that I'm like, if you really want to know the symptoms, go Google it because they are incredibly embarrassing. It's a terrible disease. But yeah, so at the time I was having constipation, some bleeding, some pain kind of in my abdomen and just a lot of bloating. And I remember kind of just dealing with it for a little while. And then I remember kind of talking to like my mom and a couple other people. And they were like, oh, it's probably just the stress of the wedding and moving. And I think somebody was like, you probably just have a hemorrhoid that might be bleeding. And I was like, a hemorrhoid? I'm like, I'm 22 years old.
Wait till you have a baby.
I know, right? Yeah. See, yeah, this is all pre-mom motherhood. So I had no idea what that was. And so I'm like, okay, let's just get through the wedding and see if things get better. And even just looking back now, like in my wedding dress, like my stomach was totally bloated, which I had never experienced before. And I didn't get better. And so after the wedding was over and my husband started law school, we kind of moved into our new place and things started getting back to normal. My body didn't get back to normal like I had hoped it would. And it just kind of kept going downhill more and more. And the constipation got worse. And then when I was being able to pass the bowel movement, it was really painful and there was a lot of bleeding. And finally, it was probably 2 months after our wedding, we were at my in-laws' house watching an SC game. I still remember it pretty vividly. And I felt really, really faint and, used the bathroom and saw a lot of blood. And so we went to the ER and I just remember being there and having a bunch of different tests done and basically just being sent home with kind of a note to go see a specialist. And so we ended up seeing like 3 different GI doctors, gastroenterologists, and was told everything from you just need to have more fiber in your diet. One doctor was like, just go buy oat bran and put a cup of it in your smoothie every single day.
Great. Yeah. And make me sick.
Yeah, exactly. And I did, I started taking it and then they also had me on like a bunch of those just like store-bought laxatives, like Miralax. Mm-hmm. Yeah, all of those. And what ended up happening and what they actually did see in the hospital with the x-rays, which is why I'm still surprised, which we just didn't know any better. So we of course followed their orders, but my colon was like severely impacted all the way up, completely impacted. And so you add all that fiber on top of impaction and it didn't make anything move. It just caused like tons more really, really painful bloating and gas. And I just ended up being like curled up in a ball on the couch for days at a time in so much pain until I would pass something. And so that went on for like a few weeks. And then we finally just were like, okay, this doctor's not giving us the answers we want. He didn't even perform tests. He didn't perform colonoscopy, endoscopy, anything like that. So we finally found another doctor who we went in and saw, and he was the one that said, let's do a colonoscopy immediately. He admitted me to the hospital right away. And started the prep for that. And after that procedure, that's when they found out that I had ulcerative colitis. They came out wondering if it was Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis. They had to do some biopsies. But essentially, Crohn's is in a different part of the intestines and ulcerative colitis is in your lower GI tract. And so that was the diagnosis after all of that. I think it was a good 5 or 6 months before we really had an actual diagnosis.
And what are they looking for during the colonoscopy? And in specifically, they're looking for ulcers and inflammation. Mm-hmm. Was there anything else when they're taking a biopsy? What were they looking for there?
Really just the 2 things that you said. I guess when they went in, they said that the whole lower left side actually for me, but was just completely filled with ulcers. and a ton of inflammation, and, could see the bleeding and see the scar tissue from all of the ulcers and bleeding that had been going on for those few months. So that's what they're looking for internally. And it's really interesting because typically Crohn's disease is associated with more constipation, and ulcerative colitis is more diarrhea and multiple bathroom trips a day, like 20-ish when you're in a flare and bleeding. And it's kind of always been interesting to me because I didn't experience the ulcerative colitis symptoms until after I had the colonoscopy. I was having constipation, which is so interesting to me. And so, I don't know what flipped it. I think possibly the prep, which is really unfortunate. And I learned later that the prep for a colonoscopy, so whether you have a diagnosis or you're just in your 40s and getting your standard, colonoscopy prep, it's so important to do the prebiotics and probiotics beforehand. And nobody told me that. And quite honestly, they still don't say anything. But it just wreaks havoc on your whole microbiome because that prep that they do is pretty intense. You're drinking or taking these pills that just clear you out completely. And it clears out both the good and bad bacteria. And then you're set, you're left with just this ground zero starting point. And at that point, I wasn't eating in a way that was beneficial for the healthy gut bacteria or to rebuild that. I was just eating a standard American diet. And so I probably at the end of it ended up having a bad bacteria overgrowth.
A worse biome.
Right. Than what I probably started with. And so we learned that over time. And we learned that every time I would get a colonoscopy, it would throw me into a flare up. And this has been this was back in 2007. So a 12-year journey now. And I'm still at this point, still learning things about the disease and about my body over time. But so the diagnosis was interesting just because it was almost relieving that we figured out what it was, but then in a way frustrating because they didn't really give us any information. So they never told us that it was an autoimmune disease. And maybe at that time they were still figuring out that ulcerative colitis was an autoimmune disease, but that was never mentioned to me. So I had no idea that, what it was my immune system overacting and attacking my colon, that stress could be a massive factor of it. They never, told me, they put me on tons of medications. I was on 100 milligrams of prednisone steroids at one point, and anti-inflammatory medications, and just all the slew of medications that they wrote prescriptions for and kind of shoot us out the door of the hospital and told me that I'd live a normal life. But they never mentioned the side effects of all of the medications, in addition to really not even telling me what the symptoms of UC was, because I had just been having some constipation and some just kind of cramping and stuff like that in advance or before the procedure. I just didn't really even know what UC would look like as part of my normal life. He said it was incurable, but that the medications would keep it under control. But he never mentioned most people have flare-ups, 1 to 2 times a year. And this is what a flare-up looks like, or this is what, you might experience. And so it kind of just all came as a massive shock to me as it started. And I experienced kind of my first major flare up coming out of the hospital, but then again, 6 months later. And unfortunately, that one was when we were heading to Uganda to go and do some humanitarian work. And I had just no idea how severe the disease was. If I did, I probably wouldn't have gone. But we even asked the doctor and said, is it safe for us to go? And he said it was fine. And by the time we got to Uganda, it's like a 48-hour journey. I was in a wheelchair and ended up having to check into a hospital there because my disease progressed so quickly, and I ended up being super anemic, and just a lot of these things that nobody told me would happen. I didn't even know at that point that losing that much blood could cause anemia. I don't think I even knew what anemia was. I didn't know, what being anemic could make your body feel like. And in addition to that, just the massive inflammation that I was experiencing and how that kind of ended up stemming out throughout my whole body. And so I just was really, really naive to what the disease was. And the doctors really didn't help with that in any way, shape, or form. So I feel like pretty much everything I've learned about the disease has just been through my own experiences and research at this point, and not really with any help.
So when the flare up happens for you, it's a large amount of inflammation in the colon. The ulcers come back, the bleeding returns. Are you constipated? Are you having
No.
diarrhea?
Yeah. So now with UC, I have not had a constipation problem. I don't think since I was originally diagnosed. Oh, actually, maybe after my C-section, very briefly. Yeah. And that's totally unrelated, but, no, with the UC flare, it's a lot of diarrhea. It's, depending on how severe the disease is for you and where in the colon it is, it can be bathroom trips, anywhere from like 10 to 30 times a day. If it's really severe, it's problems getting to the bathroom in time, which is probably the hardest part of the disease for most people, because it just, in terms of having a social
having social anxiety to go anywhere.
Yes,
I mean,
exactly.
think about like going out on a boat, going on a, like in a van or a bus with a group. Like I can think of all of the places where you would have anxiety about where the bathroom is.
Yeah, pretty much anywhere. Being in the center of a theater, like instead of on the outside where you can get up easily, or being like at a dinner with people that you don't know and having to excuse yourself. I mean, there's every scenario you could possibly think of. I think everybody has, regardless of if you have this disease or not, you've all been in that one situation where you maybe you ate something,
gotta
or
go.
food poisoning, or you know what that feeling is. So just imagine it being like that every day, 20 times a day, essentially. And the flare-ups, for most people can last anywhere from like 2 to 6 months. But then depending on how bad it is, and for me in the early stages, it would last for so long that then I would end up being hospitalized and needing blood transfusions. And then having another like 3 months of trying to recover from that. So it was like I was pretty much incapacitated like 9 months of the year. And then I would have a few months where I'd feel well and I'd work on gaining weight and, getting all of my like nutrients back, everything that I was completely deficient in back up. And then 3 months later, it's like I would go through it again. So it was a pretty terrible cycle where it would just keep me, incapacitated for months and months and months at a time. But yeah, that's what a flare typically looks like. Severe pain when you do go to the bathroom, so much so that like you have a bowel movement. There were times where I couldn't walk back to my bed because I was in so much pain from passing the bowel movement that it would almost make me feel like I was going to pass out. And so there were times where I'd like have to crawl back to bed because it takes kind of like all the strength you have to go. And so that's kind of another symptom. But yeah, and then the bleeding and the bleeding then leads to anemia, which, causes a whole slew of other issues. There was a point where I had lost so much blood over kind of the period of my flare up that my hemoglobin was, I think, at a 7, which I think it's supposed to be somewhere between like 14 and 16 as a woman. So I had to have like multiple blood transfusions to practically like revive me. And this was at a point where it's like, I just didn't realize that letting something go for so long could cause that, and so it was like, I was having symptoms for a couple months or 3 months, but it was not to the point, it was still like I was able to kind of live my life, like even though it wasn't convenient, but I just didn't realize that the buildup of having those symptoms for so long could result in so many other problems. And so, we learned that was for the first few years of having the disease. I just had no idea. And then we started to learn, like, as soon as you see symptoms, you've got to figure out, how to start to try to curb it. And there's, been times where I've been able to pull it back, and there's been times where I haven't. And so it's kind of just it's like a game each time of figuring out how to get it to stop.
At what point were you like, okay, I'm completely fed up with this.
Yeah.
The Band-Aid isn't working for me anymore. I know I'm sure we're thinking about starting a family, or had, like when did this all come together, and when did you decide like food could be medicine, or, like, did you stumble on someone's blog, or were you, I can only imagine you in the depths of the internet, midnight or 2 a.m, like, God, this needs to be over.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. I mean, so, social media wasn't around. I was diagnosed in 2007, and Facebook was just starting, but yeah, so I actually asked every single one of my specialists from the very beginning if there was something I could eat that could help. And only, I didn't study medicine in school or nutrition or anything like that. But just because my specific disease was in my colon, I mean, there's a slew of other autoimmune diseases that I don't know if I would have been diagnosed if I would have gone to food for that. But because it was in my colon and I knew everything that I was eating was coming and going through there, and that I noticed that like there was a lot more pain during bowel movements during certain times if I ate certain things. And so I just kept asking them, I'm like, can food do anything? Is there anything that I need to get more of? Is there anything I need to cut out? And every single
like
doctor,
oat bran. Just kidding.
Yeah, right. No, right. Yeah. That's the only time that food, I mean, even the oat bran, that was the only time that any sort of food was ever mentioned to me. And every time I asked, they all said like three things. They said, diet doesn't cause it, it can't cure it, and it can't help it. And so for a long time, like when I was sick, that I just kind of took that as fact. You listen to your doctors. And then, I mean, I think it was in the middle of the night. So prednisone, especially at 100 milligrams, will keep you awake for all hours of the night. Like not even, a 5-minute doze off. You will be awake at all hours of the night. Like I remember watching Cartoon Network at 4 a.m. because that's all that's on, or infomercials. And so you just don't sleep and you become this crazy person. It completely like alters your brain. And I was a nutcase on it. And I would just Google and search and try to find things. And gosh, I mean, there were lots of rabbit trails where I thought I had colon cancer, but then I'd find things that made me really, like inspired and find things that made me feel like, okay, I can actually make this work. And so I think the first time that I came across it as I just started searching was on a medical chat board. I had just been searching and I found, some of these like UC Crohn's kind of chat boards where people that had it would come in and start sharing about what their medication was or what they were doing that worked or how long, and I remember like they had like a signature line underneath their comment where people would put, when they were diagnosed and when their last flare-up was and what medications they were currently on and if they were doing anything diet-wise. And I started seeing some people that were doing the SCD, which is the specific carbohydrate diet. And somebody had actually, a good family friend of ours had given me the book called Breaking the Vicious Cycle a few months after I'd been diagnosed. And I kind of threw it up on the shelf and just didn't look at it because it felt really overwhelming for me. And I always tell this for people, it's like people are so well-meaning when you've got a disease and you're sick, but it can also be for the person who is suffering through that disease. It can be really, really overwhelming to get thrown a whole bunch of information. And especially from people who don't know or have the experience of having the disease, because you kind of just look at them and say like, you don't know, like you don't understand. And you're so overwhelmed with just fighting the disease every day and trying to weed through all the information that a book or just listen to this podcast or, it's just like, it gets really, really overwhelming. And what I needed was like somebody to just say, here's what you need to do, this, and this, and then I could try it. But like reading a book and trying to filter out the information to me just was like, I don't have the brain power to do it. So the book was on the shelf, but then hearing from somebody personally that knew and had the disease that had used that way of eating and had seen some sort of improvement was really what sparked me to try it. Because it was just like, okay, somebody that actually knows what this is like, that is in real life, experiencing symptom-free life because of this way of eating is enough for me to want to give it a shot. So that was really kind of my first thing was just on the internet. And that's really when we started diving into kind of cutting things out and trying that. And SCD is very similar to the paleo diet, except for that it allows a few extra things. It allows fermented dairy and dairy that's aged for long periods of time that's pretty much free of lactose. But it's grain-free and it's refined sugar-free. It only allows very, very particular sweeteners. Honey, I think, and dates were the only ones that were allowed. And then no, regular dairy, no milk and cream and soft cheeses, things that were high in lactose. And then trying to think what else. It allowed legumes, which was interesting. And that's actually one of the things that I ended up cutting out later that I was eating still that I just wasn't, they were still causing me issues. But if they were soaked and sprouted properly, that was allowed. But really SCD in general was created by a doctor for her daughter who had Crohn's disease. And it was a diet that focused on repopulating healthy gut bacteria. So you were supposed to eat like homemade fermented yogurt every single morning or kefir. And then you were cutting out a lot of these specific carbs that fed kind of the pathogens and bad bacteria. That's kind of what the diet is built around.
Yeah, low FODMAPs.
Yeah. Actually, you know what? It wasn't really low FODMAPs. Like they allowed onions and apples and garlic. I mean, it didn't talk. Yeah. I mean, and that's something, and this is where it's like, it's interesting because then this is where I kind of developed my, like, you have to listen to your body mentality, because I was on SCD for such a long time and was just not seeing, I mean, I saw improvement, but I wasn't seeing the improvement that I really wanted to. And we were able to pinpoint it. So in the early stages of that diet, they want you eating that yogurt every morning. And then you're supposed to be eating homemade soup, like chicken soup, you know, with the bones. So like really, really nutrient rich bone broth. And one of the recipes in the book has chicken soup that has onions and garlic and, you know, carrots and celery and all that kind of stuff. And so I was eating that every single day. And I started to realize like the onions and garlic were causing me issues. And that the yogurt was actually causing me issues as well. And so it's just super interesting because I think it's, you know, I think it's so often that you just kind of find a book or something that gives you hope and you put the blinders on and you just follow it to a T. But oftentimes, I mean, everybody's body is slightly different and people's bodies might react to different things. And so I had to really realize that I had to watch my symptoms, and that even though the book said, you know, to eat this every single day, it may not be right for me. And that's kind of what I tell people, you know, even with my books now, like I write cookbooks and of course I want people to buy and use them, but there might be certain things that I'm able to tolerate now that if you're newly diagnosed or you might have something else that you may not be able to, you know, eat the coconut flour or the nut flours or whatever it is, or eggs. And so that was kind of a process for me to learn. But yeah, I started with SCD, which is also super similar to the GAPS diet, which I think GAPS now is a little bit more popular and prevalent than SCD. It's kind of a little bit more updated, I think, from SCD. SCD is a little bit antiquated in that, like, they still don't, you know, they don't allow any canned products. And there's a lot now that has come out that we can use that's convenience items. And they also just didn't focus on quality foods. So, you know, no focus on or emphasis on organic or grass-fed or pasture-raised. And, you know, while it's not accessible or affordable for everybody at all times, I did notice that eating conventional meats and chicken was not giving me like the progress that I wanted to. And it was causing inflammation still. And I think a lot of that has to do with that, you know, the food that I was buying was still either, you know, if it was protein sources, it was being fed all the grains and things that I was cutting out of my diet, which I think you still get when you're eating that. And then in terms of like the produce, you know, I was eating conventional produce. And so who knows if pesticides or whatever it was, you know, that certain things that might have been on that stuff was still kind of causing my system to just not accept it. So I noticed a bigger improvement once I started focusing on kind of the quality of the food that I was buying as well.
Yeah, you know, it's so hard because when you think about the protein that we're eating, picking making the decision to purchase quality protein, and like trying to have that discussion with clients is really important to me. I mean, Chris and I literally don't have nightstands, but I buy protein from Thrive Market and from Butcher Box.
It's true.
Sometimes from US Wellness Meats, like depending on what I need, because you know, when you see these studies that come out that like a piece of conventional chicken when put in a petri dish can kill E. coli, you're like, oh, that's a lot of antibiotics that are present in that piece of protein. That it's neutralizing that strong of a bacteria. You know, and killing that strong of bacteria. What is it doing to the gut bacteria? You know, to my personal gut bacteria microbiome. It's important to know the side effects of those things. So it's
true. It is a hard thing, and I love the way you approach it. Just like even just what you said, but it was a process for me, and that's what I kind of try to tell people. You know, I'm like, it was definitely a few years before I started to switch that stuff. And gosh, I mean, going further into like the things I was cleaning my house with, or the things I was putting on my face and my hair and my makeup, and that's all been a long journey for me. And it wasn't all just kind of like a, you know, rip the Band-Aid off at one time. But I do tell people, like, if you're eating this way and you're not seeing the improvement that you're hoping to, then here's some switches that if you haven't already made that are important. And it's the same for us. Like, I get that question a lot, and, like, well, I can't afford it, or, whatever. It's like priority, wise. And I think there's certain ways to do it where you can buy the cheaper cuts of meat, that are grass fed, and they might have to be slow cooked or, long kind of simmered to get them to break down a little bit, but they're more affordable and they're still grass fed. And then I think, buying locally from your rancher or farmer and just stuff like that, where you can make your way around it. And I've even, heard from people, they're like, well, we've just decreased our meat intake slightly. Like, we just do a little bit smaller portions so that we can buy the grass fed stuff, which I'm like, great. If that's the way that it works for you, I think it is important. And it's hard because you definitely get pushback from that, because I know it's not available everywhere or affordable. But yeah, we're kind of the same way. It's like we've cut other things out. I mean, I remember going through budgets when we were early days, and thinking about ways like, okay, well, we were going out this many times a week to eat, and now, let's cut that back, or like going out for coffee or whatever it is, just to try to restructure. And then the one thing that I say is, one of my medications was $800 a month with insurance. Then I was having, hospital stays for weeks at a time every year. And so we're saving thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars from medical treatment that now, obviously I can repurpose some of that into food, but we cleared out our savings. And I mean, gosh, it was a major financial hardship when I was first diagnosed, just all of the bills and everything. So it's not an easy swap, obviously, but yeah, I mean, that's the one thing I think of. I'm like, okay, I'm choosing to buy quality ingredients and instead of being hospitalized and on major medications all the time.
Yeah. And it's like, you do what you can. I can completely agree with you when it comes to changing your life, right? So it's not something we can ever do overnight. It has to become easy. It has to be a habit, whether that's like, you join Thrive Market and you have your little like grocery list that you order that keep your staples low. Mm-hmm. Like, I was just looking on their website or on their app last night, and organic mustard was $1.49.
Yeah. I mean, that's like, you have to stock up when you see sales. That's what I tell people too.
That's like, a $4 difference.
Yeah.
Than what you would get if you went to a grocery store. And it's just a little bit of planning ahead, or a little, depending on, whether you have a cabinet to sort of stock some things and know, okay, I'm going to keep an extra of this or an extra of that, just so that I can keep those costs down. Yeah. I mean, just a
same with me. Saving. Yeah. So I had like a little mini, freezer for like the kind that you buy when you pump a lot and you want to store your breast milk.
Oh yeah. I have one of those on my video right now.
Yeah. Right. It's like, it's compact enough that even if you live in an apartment or whatever, like you can maybe fit it somewhere. And so we put ours outside, and I now use it for if I see grass-fed ground beef on sale, like if it's a few dollars off, I buy, I'm like, if that's the kind of stuff you can keep in the freezer for a while. And so I stock up on any time I see sales. And definitely, I mean, we utilize Thrive a lot. But yeah, it is. It definitely takes a little more planning and some decisions. It's like you have to just think about that kind of stuff. And I also tell people, like, you have to look at the things that you're buying. I think the things, like, especially with the way that my books are and kind of what I'm known for, like all the baked goods. And I think that kind of stuff can be overwhelming for people at first, because all of those pantry staples are definitely more expensive. And so when I'm talking to people, I'm like, hey, if you have to choose to buy grass-fed meat or make almond flour cupcakes, like, please choose the meat and don't buy every once in a while make those treats, but that stuff is way more honey, and like those ingredients are way more expensive, I think, than just your produce and your quality meats. And so I think if you have to kind of pick and choose, and then of course with like, produce, the dirty dozen, and buying local so it's not sprayed with stuff to make the long commute, like going to your farmer's market. Like, there's a lot of ways I think that you can do it smartly on a budget. There was one, and I'm super curious if you know about this. There was an article that I read a long time ago, and I was trying to find it because I can't even remember now who wrote it. It might have been Mark Sisson, but it was an article I read about if you have to pick conventional beef, that there's certain cuts that are better than the others. And I think it was the lower fat ones, maybe, because the like
fat
feed and
toxins.
Right. The fat. So maybe that's what it was. I was trying to tell somebody that the other day. I'm like, if you really can't, buy it, then if you get the more lean cuts, then it's not going to have as much of the, toxins and things that the animal was given during its life, or the GMO feed or whatever stored in it. But I thought that was a super interesting article because, I like around the world in different places, it's not as accessible as it is for some of us. And so I think to know those things and to know what to look for. And then if you are going to buy grass-fed meat, then I assume that the higher fat content is great because you're getting more of the omega-3 and CLAs as well. So I don't know, just like those little tidbits that people like you share, with us.
Love that CLA drop.
Conjugated
linoleic acid.
I'm learning.
Only natural, healthy trans fat. That's great for your body and cells and brain health. So
yeah, good. Thank you for explaining that. Well, yeah, I took a trip to like a grass-fed dairy farm last year, and we don't do it. Yeah, it was actually really enlightening. We don't do a ton of dairy in my house because I don't tolerate it much, but my kids like cheese, and it's nice to have options every once in a while. And so I was super curious to just learn about the benefits of grass-fed dairy over conventional, and I was blown away, quite honestly, like just to see the difference. And then of course the difference on how, some of the animals are raised. Obviously, small farmers and ranchers are doing well, but like the big cattle kind of feedlot industry with the mass produced type of dairy, and then just the small like grass-fed farm and how they do things differently, and just how much more nutrient dense the products are, both the meat and the dairy, I just thought was really interesting. And so I think that might be where I learned about the higher omega-3 and CLA. And I probably couldn't have told you what that was a few years ago, but I'm learning more and more now as I keep going and being in this industry. So
when it came to sharing, you just started sharing recipes and knowing that like the food going into your body and coming out, whether fast or slow or regular, was really affecting your body. And so you dabbled in STD and then started pulling legumes and getting a little bit, more restrictive with the lactose. And did the flares start to stop happening, or did they space out, or obviously that inspired you to start helping other people and start your blog Against All Grain.
Yep.
So, tell us about how you started your business and your blog, and it's obviously boomed into 4 amazing cookbooks and videos and tips and your Instagram, and you're really helping people in a really accessible way, which I love. So many times you can jump on a blog or an Instagram, and it really isn't accessible for people who really don't care much to know about the biology, their own biology, the nutrition that's in their food. They just want to know how to feel better and what to make. And you're really giving people those tools. So, how did that all start for you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, thank you, first of all, for all of that. I think it did come from that same place, kind of like I said, of just being handed a book. It was just really overwhelming for me. And so I knew that there were probably other people out there like that, not that I wasn't interested in learning about the science and the why, but I just couldn't handle it. It was just too much. And I just needed to know what to do, how to get better. And I did. I started cooking. My oldest son, who's now almost 9, was 9 months old when I think I started it when he was born, but I just started getting into the kitchen when he was napping and testing out recipes. And at the time there were only 2, I think, grain-free blogs at that time. I still can remember them. And I tried, one of them was Alana's Pantry.
Oh, I met her last weekend.
She's great. She's wonderful. She struggles with MS. And so she's like the, original grain-free. Yeah, totally. And I started finding her recipes and making some of them. And there was one other one called I think it was called Comfy Belly.
Okay.
And I don't even know if she's still around or not. Her son, I think, had Crohn's disease. Her name was Erica. Anyways, so I started using some of the recipes, but then I, just was not fully satisfied at the time when I would make things. I just was like, this just doesn't feel like this can be sustainable for me. I'm 23 years old, and I wouldn't call myself a foodie at the time, but I definitely watched Food Network and enjoyed food. And I just was like, I can't eat this way forever. And so I got into the kitchen and just really started kind of trying to create things that felt like they would make me happy.
Yeah. If you're needing to be so restrictive with the types of food that you're using to create meals, you have to get in there and get your hands dirty.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that was the biggest thing too, is I found myself not committing to it 100%. And most of that was mental. It was just like, oh, I can't live this way forever, or a bite of this won't hurt, or a bite of this, And so I started to realize, okay, in order for me not to take a bite of, the cookie or cake that my husband's eating, I need to create a version that I love and that I can have on hand, or whatever it is, that I can still feel really satisfied and not feel like I'm deprived after each meal, or like the family recipes that, I grew up eating and loved, that I could still make those in a different fashion. And so it was really just kind of like I turned my kitchen into a test lab and just started swapping ingredients and having, lots of failures at the beginning, and then really starting to figure out like, oh wow, like I think I've got a handle on this, and I know what stuff can be swapped in and out, and I know what makes me feel good. And so I did end up kind of, like you mentioned, swapping from SCD to more of a paleo diet. That just came from doing an elimination diet with my naturopath. We cut out the legumes and all dairy, and ended up having to cut a lot more at the time, but eggs and nightshades, a lot of stuff. But I saw such a drastic improvement, like 48 hours, my symptoms decreased, by 75%.
Wow.
And that was, it was pretty incredible.
You need to repeat that for people listening, because it's like, oh, just a little bite. But if you have a little bit, but it's not going to make that big of a difference. But these are triggers that cause flares, that cause the symptoms.
Totally.
Your body is just like, please stop.
Please stop. Yeah. And I think that was, I think if it was once, it probably would have been okay. But if it was, a little bit every other day for a certain amount of time, and that's when it's like the inflammation just builds up and your body's like, okay, enough is enough. And so, so I did the elimination diet. It ended up looking very similar to the autoimmune kind of paleo thing it was way back then, before that became a little bit more popularized. But essentially it's paleo, which is no grains, dairy, legumes, processed anything, plus a whole slew of other things. So it's anything that I think, can be inflammatory in the body. So it's eggs, nuts and seeds, nightshades, which is, tomatoes, eggplants, white potatoes, peppers. Am I missing anything? I think I got them all.
You got them all?
Yeah, I got them all. And no dairy. Yeah. So that was my elimination diet, and it felt incredibly strict. But what my naturopath kind of kept, telling me was like, this isn't forever. This is an elimination diet to try to figure out what are your triggers, and give your body some time and your gut some time to heal off of all of those things. And then we'll start adding them back in slowly. And so I think I was off of all that stuff for about 6 months or so. But from the minute I cut it with her, I saw a 75% decrease in my symptoms within like 48 hours. And so for me, and with anybody that has like UC or Crohn's, I think it's a little bit more immediate, just because those things are passing through your gut. I think maybe with other autoimmune diseases that are inflammatory, conditions, might take a little bit more time to see that. And that's usually why I kind of tell people, I'm like, do a 30-day, if anything, just to give your body some time to kind of heal and reset and really see the difference. But mine is pretty immediate. Even now when I still do have, like I get postpartum flare-ups, or I can still get some stress-induced flare-ups, like I can notice day to day, depending on what I eat, my symptoms changing. And so I can have a really, really good day if I'm super careful the day before and I know exactly, what my kind of triggers are now. And then if I accidentally eat something, or I think that I can eat something, I can totally be, in bed the next day in pain or whatever it is. So that's the blessing kind of, and a curse of UC though, is just like, it's pretty immediate. And the other thing with UC is like, some of these diseases will last and just kind of go on and on and on. And UC is so interesting in that, like, it can come on really fierce, and then it just kind of ends depending on what you're doing to help make it end. And then you're just symptom free for 6, 8, 12 months. And then all of a sudden it's like, it can just come right back. It's frustrating, but it's also almost nice in a way that you just know, like, when it ends, it's done, hopefully. So at least for me.
Yeah. So when you're talking a little bit about like stopping those symptoms in their tracks, and helping to calm and squelch that inflammation as fast as possible. What are your like top 5 tips for listeners if they have UC or an autoimmune disease? That's is, the thing is I'm like, that's food related. They all start there.
So, they do. I think everything starts in the gut and works its way out.
So what do you personally do?
So I revert back to that kind of similar elimination diet that I did, where I just cut anything that I think could be inflammatory. So I'm already, always grain-free and dairy-free, but I will cut nightshades. I'll cut, especially for UC, raw stuff is really tough if you're flaring. So raw veggies and raw fruits are really hard to digest. And it can just it can be really painful after you've eaten something like that, especially like salad greens. And so it's a little tough because I find it's a little harder to get the nutrients that I want when I'm not feeling well, which is I don't love. And so I'll introduce I do a smoothie, which unfortunately you're going to cringe because it doesn't have all of your Fab4. When I'm sick, I just can't do it. So all of the fiber and everything, it's just really hard for me to do. So it's a very, very simple. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on it, but I use, oh my gosh, it's a paleo protein powder, and I use the chocolate one. And I had a flare last year after I had my daughter, and it actually got me through it. But it's paleo a bone, yeah, maybe, and it's like a bone broth. I think it is paleo.
Well, there's Ancient Nutrition, which is like Dr. Axe's brand. He does a bone broth protein. Then there's Paleo Pro, which is a grass-fed beef and egg protein. And then Paleo Pro also does bone broth and collagen.
It's pure paleo protein.
That's great.
It's a good one.
Just grass-fed beef. That's
right.
Chris Kresser's favorite. And
yes, So that's really the one that I do. So I do that with avocado and almond milk and a banana. And that's kind of it's just super easy on my system. So I would just say either adding some sort of a collagen every single day into smoothie or whatever. I do that. And then bone broth, and then cutting out those inflammatory foods. I'm trying to think 5. You said 5. Oh, rest is huge. We talked about this when we were together. And it's one of those things that it took me years to realize that it actually, no matter what I'm doing food-wise or supplement-wise or, anything, if I'm not resting and not trying to minimize my stress, I will not get better. And I realized that probably a few years ago, when I had a flare after my son was born, it was I have to just take time. I have to either schedule naps, or I need to take a week to just lay in bed and let my body just kind of just stop and my brain to stop. But I realized over time that it doesn't matter how clean you eat sometimes with an autoimmune disease. If you're running yourself ragged and you're, traveling all the time, or you're staying up and you're not getting sleep, or you're stressing about work all the time, or whatever it is, your body just will not heal. So that's probably another big thing. And then supplement wise, there's been a few that I've added over the years that I think have really helped. So I take a liposomal curcumin. So, we all hear about turmeric, but it's just a liquid form that's more easily absorbable, bioavailable, I guess you'd say. And then butyrate. That's another one that I actually see a functional doctor out of Chris Kresser's practice up here in the Bay Area. Yeah. And she had me start butyrate a couple years ago. Even butyrate enemas back when I was really sick. We started a couple years ago that I had never done before. And I saw, it's not glamorous, but we've already gotten into all of the nitty gritty anyways about this disease. So with UC, it's if you can put stuff up there to actually hit it in its spot, as opposed to trying to take it orally and have it make its way through all of the other systems and get down there. Enemas can be really effective. And so they had me do butyrate enemas, which I didn't know even what butyrate was back, years ago. And as I've read more about it, I've realized why it can be beneficial for people with UC. But yeah, so curcumin and butyrate would be the two things. And then a really high potent fish oil type thing for inflammation. Those are kind of the supplement wise would be the three things I'd recommend. Well, and collagen. So 4. I don't know how many things I gave you. You asked me for 5,
great.
But
I'm gonna put links. We'll put the links to your favorite stuff in the show notes.
Great.
And I think just to clarify a couple of things, curcumin is the active ingredient inside of turmeric. That's what that is the anti-inflammatory component inside of turmeric. So I always tell my clients, my friends, my family, make sure that you're using a curcumin, because that's really the benefit. If you're taking a supplement and not just shaking it, shaking turmeric into a smoothie or into a curry dish or something.
Right.
And then butyrate is a fatty acid that's produced by gut bacteria. So when you have a lot of really healthy gut bacteria, they ferment fiber that you eat. So like why we're always talking about eating fiber, right?
Yeah.
And they give off this short chain fatty acid, which is then fuel for the epithelial cells or your gut cells to, keep their tight junctures, to stay healthy. And, butyrate is anti-inflammatory. There are a million reasons why butyrate is great for your body, but you have to have that great microbiome to produce it. So it's a catch-22 for people with, I guess, autoimmune diseases or gut issues, because if they don't have the microbiome to produce the butyrate, then they don't have the energy and the fuel for their gut to heal. So taking butyrate or getting it into your colon or intestinal tract is actually a really great way to get fuel in there to heal and to kind of stop that cycle. So
that's a much better explanation.
I love what they're just if there's anyone out there that wants to kind of understand that a little bit further. Those are two, I think, great supplements, and obviously a strong omega-3 is so good too.
I'm excited to do this with you on the phone because you are the expert, and people ask me all the time on the supplements I take, and I'm just not comfortable giving like a list out because I think dosages are different for people. And again, it's like some people might react better to different things. And I also don't always know the explanation because I work with a practitioner to do that. And so I think I'm excited to get to share a few of those things with your explanation behind it, because I think they could really benefit people. But I'm just always cautious on Instagram and, social when people ask, because I'm like, I don't want to just give this, like blanket prescription of supplements and have you just go start taking them ad hoc and not understanding. So that's great. One more thing is just a really great probiotic. I mean, I try to get natural probiotics into my system all the time, but especially during a flare, like things like kombucha and sauerkraut, and those I can't tolerate them as well. So I take one it's specifically formulated for UC and Crohn's, but it's a really, really high potency probiotic that I take as well. So I think that's really important too, especially if you have gut issues, because that's usually you have an imbalance down there. So
yeah, you've dealt with a lot. I feel like, with an autoimmune disease, it comes just a lot of time in your bed, a lot of healing time, a lot of heartbreak. And I know that you've personally been through a lot. You built a brand and business based on what you were going through, but that put you in the public eye, with a lot of people following you in the good times and the bad, which, I know we haven't, we've talked a little bit about Aila, but you have 3 beautiful children, but you had 4.
Yeah.
And I think that it's, I know that there are a lot of people that go through losing a child and the side effects, of that and the PTSD of that. And, first, I love you as a friend, and I have read and followed your story before we were even friends.
Yeah.
And, I'm curious how how you deal with that daily and who supports you, because I think, you have this beautiful angel walking by your side daily, but it's got to be one of the hardest things you've ever gone through in your life, harder than ever dealing with the fact that you have had this autoimmune disease. Like, I can't even take myself, I can't imagine that. Like, I'm just so sorry for what you've had to go through, and you and your husband and your boys, and, before Kezia was born. But like, what are you doing? How do you deal with that? And how did you deal with that at the time?
Oh yeah, it's a never growing process. I think that it changes every day. So yeah, we lost our baby girl, Aila, shortly after birth, just like 30, 40 minutes. And she would be 5 in June.
Yeah.
Right. I'm like, yes.
And now I'm going to cry.
So she would have been our second child, or she was our second child after my son Asher. And yeah, I had already put out my first cookbook. So I did have kind of a public platform, and we were excited to announce that we were having a girl, first of all, and that she was actually due right around the same time as my second book, Meals Made Simple. And so we kind of announced those two things together. And so when we found out at our 20-ish week appointment that she likely wouldn't live past birth, that we kind of were faced with that like question of, do we share this with my audience who has already been so excited for her arrival and who's, been supporting us for so long, or do we kind of keep it to ourselves and then just announce something afterwards? And, we had seen such support and such community come around my disease, and had also seen that sharing our hard times publicly could really help people in the autoimmune kind of world, and just how many people, my story had already helped in the food and the health side. And so it was kind of a conscious decision just to say like, all right, we're going to just share what we're walking through, because, there might be other people that are walking through the same. And then at the same time, we are people of faith. And I know, that there were a lot of other people out there, and we just thought like, hey, we're going to just try to believe that there'll be some sort of a miracle and that she might make it. And if there's other people that can believe that with us, then, that is encouraging. And so we just kind of announced it and just kind of let people walk through that with us. And also just, it would be really hard to be out on social media during that time, knowing that kind of like secret almost, and having people walk through like being excited for my pregnancy. And, I didn't want to constantly like have people being like, give us a bump shot. And, just all that stuff that happens like when you're pregnant and you're walking through that, especially on like public platforms. And I knew that it would be really, really hard for me to have people asking like how my pregnancy was going, or, wanting to see her nursery. And just like, as we were trying to deal with all of that, and just kind of that waiting period until she was born, there was no way technically for them to diagnose whether or not she would make it. And so it was just kind of this like, well, we're going to have to just wait and see when she's born.
Yeah.
And so that's really the reason why we let people, now you're going to make me cry.
I'm sorry.
Because you're no, it's okay. I have talked about this so much that I still don't get me wrong. I probably,
I know.
I cry about her probably once a week. And it's one of those things that you just don't, it's really hard to understand, as, like I had some friends who had lost babies before we lost her, and I just didn't realize what that looked like day to day. I know I remember having sympathy for them, but also kind of looking at them and being like, oh, well, they have other kids, or they're happy, or, whatever it is. And you just don't realize that like, once you lose a child, like they're always part of your family. And there's people that are well-meaning, but they'll say like, oh, I don't ever want to mention her because I don't want to remind you of her, or whatever it is. And you're like, I could never be reminded of her. Like she's in my mind every single day. Like when I think of my kids, she's one of them. And there's not a day that goes by that I don't think about her. When I see, my now 3 kids together, there's not a minute that goes by that I don't wish that she was there with them, or that now that we have another little girl, that like she could have her older sister. And so she's part of our family, and we've kind of chosen to just be open about her in general. And after she passed away, it was, I think I put out a blog post, but it's been incredible to see the legacy that she left. What, my business, quote unquote, of being out there and writing books about food and things like that. It just was so interesting to see that sharing on that very same platform would end up helping just hundreds of thousands of women that were dealing with loss, whether it was miscarriage or even infertility or child loss or infant loss. Just that there's so many women and families that have gone through it. And I think so often in our culture, it's not really acceptable, and it's kind of taboo to talk about it because it makes people feel really uncomfortable. And so women who have lost babies feel like they have to be silent, and they don't feel like they can say their baby's name, or, they can remember their birthday when it comes, or they can grieve the things, the milestones that, that they missed, like the first steps and go starting kindergarten. If I'm saying she's going to be turning 5, like those things just never leave your mind as a mom.
Yeah.
As soon as you find out you're pregnant, you start to imagine what that life will be like going forward. And you just imagine all those times. And so while you didn't get to meet, or I met her, but while you didn't get to actually have those memories, like when you lose a loved one who's, elderly, and you have your whole lifetime of memories, you have almost like, I don't know what you'd call them because they're not memories, but like hopes and dreams and almost memories that you've created in your brain that you would have expected to happen. And so you grieve kind of the things that never were. And you continue to grieve as life goes on, because you're reminded of what should be, with every milestone or every year that passes, or seeing other kids that are the same age going through similar things that, you should be getting to go through. And so it just doesn't really ever leave you. And with kids, every family kind of chooses to walk through it and handle it differently. And you really have to gauge, what's best for your heart and for your grieving process and your healing process, but also for your kids. And so my oldest was 3.5 when she died. And so he was at an age where he actually really understood that a baby was in mommy's tummy, and, that a baby was supposed to be coming home. And so it has been it's been an incredibly hard process with him, but also really sweet in certain times, because he's just kind of far surpassed our expectations of the way that he remembers her. And as he grows, like, he's almost 9. And so his brain now just completely comprehends in a different way than when he did when he was 3.5. And so he knows now, like, he tells everybody that he has a sister in heaven. And when he draws family photos, like he draws her either in the, in the sky, or
oh my God.
Yeah, it's really, really sweet. And as a mom who, the one thing that you will hear from every single mom who's lost a baby is that you just don't want other people to forget them. Like, you will never forget them, but it's really hard to kind of watch the world move forward and feel like nobody sees you or sees the baby. And especially like, like mentioning their names, and just getting to hear that is like, hear somebody say her name is just the best thing for me. Cause it's like, okay, I'm not the only one that remembers her, and she's not just gone forever and invisible, and people have been impacted by her. And so for him to see him kind of remember her in his own way is really sweet. And now, the other 2 weren't born, obviously, when we lost her. And so for him to start to like teach them about her is really sweet as well. And just to kind of see her live on in our family, and to know that in our family, at least, she won't ever be forgotten.
What advice do you have for people when it comes to talking to people about loss?
Yeah. I mean, even just what you just said, just acknowledging that they were in our a human life, and that they were your child. And no matter how far along you go in a pregnancy, I mean, like I said, it's like from the minute you see the line on the stick, it's like no matter, you don't even know if it's a boy or a girl yet, but you've imagined their whole life.
Yeah.
And so I think just understanding that from the mother's perspective of like, this was their child, and there's a lot of life that they're grieving and missing. And I think just letting them know that you're thinking about them. I mean, there's obviously nothing that you can do to fix it or make it go away. And I think just having people that, still see you and understand, or, even just come over and let them cry, or let them talk about their baby with you, because there's just not a lot of opportunity to talk about your, baby who died. It's like, it doesn't come up in daily conversation. And,
yeah,
I'm grateful in that I did have a public platform, because now there's hundreds of thousands of people that know and say her name, which there's a lot of moms out there who are completely alone and isolated in it, and that don't ever get to talk about them, even with their own spouse or their own kids, or, it's like, there's a lot of women who live in silence and just grieve in silence. And so if you have a friend that's gone through it, just to remember their names, or to put I've been, connected with lots of some of my close friends now have lost babies because we connected through our losses. And I have reminders in my calendar when their babies' birthdays are, just to like text them and just be like, hey, I'm thinking about you today. And I'm thinking about, Audrey, or I'm thinking about Faith, or, just like their babies' names, and saying it to them is huge, because you just feel so alone in those times. And, while they're going through a loss, or just, right after, I think having patience with them, and trying, if they want space, give them space, but giving, bringing meals. I mean, it's a lot of the same stuff as any grieving, person needs. They just need support. Like if, folding their laundry or taking their kids, like, especially if they have young kids like I did. I mean, there were times where I would just be, I'd be in my room in a ball on the floor for hours at a time. And I started feeling so guilty because I've got this other child that needed me. And so, if you've got friends that have kids that are going through that, to just say like, hey, can I take your kids for a few hours? Like just to let them feel like they can grieve and cry and not, worry their child. And so those are some of the things. But really, I just always say, I'm like saying their name. That's probably the biggest thing. And just remembering them with them when you can.
It's beautiful. That's a great advice. Oh, Danielle. I swear, I feel like I've known you since I was 14 years old. Fast friends.
Yes.
Well, I can't gush about you enough. I just really think you're helping people in an approachable way, and you're real, and you're sharing your story, the good and the tough, and how to get through it. And above all of that, like for people who just want to eat clean and for stuff that tastes really, really dang good, books are amazing. Your blog is amazing. Your Instagram is amazing. Because you're just, I think, an amazing example of a child of God and a great mom and a great friend. And it's such a pleasure to share you with the world. I know the world already knows you, but if anyone out there hasn't heard of you, I think they need to go to their Instagram right now and go to Amazon and buy your books, because you really, you keep it fun, you keep it light, and you really share the good stuff. So,
well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Why don't you tell people where they can find you, where they can follow along, and
Yeah. Well, like you mentioned, I'm on Instagram, Danielle Walker. Everywhere else like Facebook and Twitter, and my blog is Against All Grain. And then I have 4 cookbooks. So anywhere that books are sold, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Target. I think they might still be in Costco. You never know. Anyways, if you can go pick up, they're all cookbooks, but they do tell my story in the beginning a little bit, and just kind of my journey through finding food and how healing it could be. And I'm like, that's it.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for joining today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I will try to edit out my sobs.
Oh my gosh.
And and you'll get a text from me on June 24th.
Yay. Thank you. I appreciate that.
I love you, friend. Thanks.
Love you too. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Be Well by Kelly. Please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Learn more at bewellbykelly.com and follow me on Instagram at bewellbykelly. I would love if you picked up my books, Body Love and Body Love Every Day. They're sold on Amazon and at all major booksellers.